Hello everybody and welcome to the British Pint. My name is Christoph and today we will be brewing two great British beers, which are the Timothy Taylor Landlord and Theakston Old Peculiar. The both beers are named in several of the British books I have as great beers of high complexity and great flavor, and I was really interested in recreating these, but it took me some time to develop a proper recipe, contrary to, for example, the Fuller's ESB, which is another supposedly great, and to my experience actually is a great British beer, which is that for the Fullers you can actually get the recipe online that the head brewer once described in an American homebrew podcast. So what I want to do today is I have three books here: the Brew Your Own British Real Ale by Graham Wheeler, the Real Ale Almanac from 1997 by Roger Protz, and The Perfect Pint by Andy Hamilton, and each one gives certain clues about what these beers are made of and how to get the recipe right. With these two beers, I'm pretty sure that I will be catering to a greater British or American audience. That's why I make the video in English. If you're interested in the Fuller's ESB video, please do check that out, although that is done in German with English subtitles. But I want to say that I do take good care of the British subtitles, and I always make sure they're accurate, and it does actually take me more than 50% of the editing time to just get the subtitles done every time. So if you appreciate it, please make sure to give a like and subscribe. So let's start with the Timothy Taylor Landlord. Now, the recipe is in Brew Your Own British Real Ale. It does agree with the Real Ale Almanac in that both state that they are made with 100% malt, and the Real Ale Almanac specifies Golden Promise. Now, we want to have an original gravity of about 1042. Since I have had increasing original gravities with the same amount of malt recently, because I think my process is getting more systematic, I did not use the value that is given here, which is about 850 grams. I went with 750 grams for my 1 gallon of beer, UK gallon, that I usually do. And so that one is already mashing behind me in the mash kettle. And I did use Golden Promise because I still had some left over from back when I did the Scottish ale. So that part is quite easy because both books agree, and there's just a few details that I'm going to talk about with the Perfect Pint. Something that is peculiar is that both books give 20 units of color for the beer, even though the Golden Promise should just give it a color of 6 to 7 EBC. So in the Brew Your Own British Real Ale, they actually add a bit of black malt. I don't really want to do that because I suspect that they are just using caramel coloring, which would be tasteless and just be something to trick the eye, basically, into believing that the beer would be different from just pale malt. So I might end up with a beer that is slightly paler, but that is not that much of an issue for me. Now the hops is where it gets really interesting. In the Brew Your Own British Real Ale, they give you, for bittering, a 50-50 mixture of Golding and Styrian Golding, and for the last 10 minutes Styrian Golding for aroma, whereas the Real Ale Almanac specifies Fuggles, Goldings and Styrian Goldings. And interestingly, the Perfect Pint says that the beer would be dry hopped, but since both of the other books disagree, I'm not going to do a dry hopping here. I am going to change the bittering though to make it half Fuggles and half East Kent Goldings. So yeah, just believing that the info given in the Real Ale Almanac is a bit more accurate. Now, to get the bittering right, I calculated the average alpha acid that they are expecting here. So here they give, for 1 UK gallon of beer, they give 12 grams with 5.1% alpha acid, but my mixture, if I do it 50-50, is 4.25% alpha acid, so I'm going to use 14 grams, 7 grams of each hop. And then the last 10 minutes I'm going to use 6 grams of Savinski Golding. Savinski is the more accurate name of what might have been Styrian Golding. Styrian Golding is not a defined name. It used to be a mixture for some time between Savinski Golding and Styrian Celea, both from Slovenia, but I believe that they mean the Savinski Golding, which is basically just Fuggles that was grown in Slovenia and has a different flavor, but is related to Fuggles. So I'm going to use 6 grams, even though they specify less here, because mine only has 2.7% alpha acid. And I want to make sure that the flavor comes through, since it is such a defining feature for this very simple and in terms of, for example, the malt, the grain bill, not very complex beer. Then what I'm going to do afterwards, once I'm done with the hop boil, is I need to take care of the yeast. And there is an image on Reddit of a list of imperial yeast equivalents to several British yeast, for example, from White Labs or Wyeast. And this is supposed to be an official imperial yeast table, contrary to the many things that you can find online which are more like educated guesses. So they give the Wyeast 1469 as the Timothy Taylor yeast and something called A05 4 squares. And I couldn't find any trace of that online. And then I realized that the Imperial Yeast Voyager, which I have been using for 3 years and almost consistently every few weeks for beer, that is actually the A05, so they must have renamed it. And that is the one that I've been starting yesterday in a starter. And to get the freshness and vitality of this yeast that I've used for about 100 generations now, I did a tiny mash with 25% oat flakes, because I read on the blog of Scott Janish that this would help the yeast boost in vitality when it is very tired from many brews. The yeast does perform very, very similar to when I first got it, except for 2 things. One, recently the foam got less and less whenever I used that yeast, and also it tends to attenuate on and on and on, so it might not be pure anymore. So maybe one day I have to buy the Wyeast 1469 to get a new batch. You cannot buy the Voyager as a homebrewer, I think, anymore. So as you can see, the yeast is extremely flocculating, and it does like to come out of the carboy when you're fermenting. So you see that here, that you have this solid layer of very dense flocculating yeast at the top. And I'm actually going to scoop that out with a clean spoon so that I have a proper top cropping, because then all the trub that I have from the oat is separated. And that's actually really great. So I have to remember this and do it again. I didn't expect it to be so well in the separation and in the vitality. I have a lot of very healthy yeast there now. Previously I was sometimes underpitching with this yeast, because it is really coming out of your carboy if it can. So as soon as you use a bit too much, it will foam and bubble over, and you will have significant loss from your wort. I once did the fermentation in a cool environment, sort of 16 degrees, maybe even less. It was in winter in the cellar, and I did actually lose really a lot of liquid there. There is a very nice description of this yeast strain in the American Homebrew blog. I forgot the name of it, but it is they are recreating the Black Sheep Rigwelter, and there's a short passage where they're describing how this yeast behaved for the person who brewed it. I'll link that down in the video description. So once we have that sorted, we just need to make sure that the yeast ferments properly. It is quite warm here now. It is in summer. You can probably see how bright it is behind me, even though that is the northern side of the building. And I will be fermenting in the cellar, which is not a full cellar. It's like half of it is underground, and it usually just has a few degrees lower temperature than upstairs here. But we have 24 degrees now, and it can be 26, 27 during the day. So I hope it will be 20, 21 maybe downstairs. I will measure that later and tell you. Okay, so that was the Timothy Taylor Landlord. The landlord is the pub owner, so that's what the beer is named after. And now we can come to the Theakston Old Peculiar. Peculiar is not the adjective peculiar written with an A. It's I think it used to be a certain kind of profession. I think it was something clerical, but I'm not sure about that. You can read it on the bottle of Theakston's Old Peculiar, and I know that because I have actually drunk a bottle of that, contrary to the Landlord, which I've never tried before. And I was not really impressed with that, but I really do not like bottled English ale. I really taste a big difference in the pub, and usually the ones from the bottle are too sweet for me. So I am going to try to brew it with the recipe that I think is accurate, and then I will probably be quite surprised how much better it is when I homebrew it than if I would get it from a bottle, which you can sometimes get in Germany here. So Theakston Old Peculiar. First, we need to get the mash right, and that is really tricky. In the Brew Your Own British Real Ale, they are using pale malt, crystal malt, and chocolate malt because we want to get to a color of 100 EBC. We also need to get to a higher gravity, 1058 instead of 1042 with the Timothy Taylor Landlord, and so I'm gonna upscale my malt. I think I went for 1050 grams in total for the 1 gallon of wort. And the problem with the chocolate malt is that it is not mentioned at all here in the Real Ale Almanac. In the Real Ale Almanac, they are talking about pale malt, crystal malt, unmalted cereal, not specified, and sugars, and they don't give percentages, unfortunately. So I have to do a bit of guesswork here. What I found online is that it does work well if you use black treacle or molasses in the mixture. So I'm going to use molasses here. Probably about 50 grams. I have no idea what the color of molasses is, especially not this particular type from German brand. It does have 50% of sugar though, a bit more, 57% sugar, so I know that 50 grams will probably be 25 grams of sugar entered there, and then it will be about 2.5 gravity points of increase. So that is something that you can calculate easily. I just use it now and see if the color is roughly 100 EBC afterwards. So that's the easy part, and then I have the mash combination here. So I have lots of pale malt, that is easy, and then I use 60 grams of crystal malt, which is the amount they indicate here in the Brew Your Own British Real Ale, and then I also use 60 grams of maize flakes, because in the Perfect Pint they actually state that they're using maize and sugars to reduce the nitrogen, which means the protein level in the beer, and give a bit of drier finish. So that is going to be really interesting, and I hope I'm going to get something original, but you do not get any more accurate description out there. So in total that is 1050 grams for me, plus the 50 grams of molasses, and then we would be done with the mash. In both of these cases I'm doing the standard mash procedure that I always do, 4 liters of mash liquor, 3 liters of sparge liquor, which is not very accurate in terms of British procedure here. If you want to be more accurate, you would go with 2.5 liters per kilogram and scale it down for each of the beers, and then sparge more, that you get the same amount of liquid in the end, so about 7 liters. The problem is just I don't want to change too much, and it's something that I'm comfortable with, and I know that my procedure works with the sparging very well, so I just want to leave that as it is. And you might have noticed also that I didn't say anything about the water with the Timothy Taylor Landlord. I am not adjusting my water at all. I do have good tap water that is with a ratio of chloride to sulfide 1:1, but in general quite a low mineral level. I think the residual alkalinity is between 5 and 6, so this is just a good average water that you can use for all different kinds of beers. I'm not going to change that. Yeah, so hops. Hops is another tricky thing with Thieves and Old Peculiar. This one is dry hop with Styrian Golding, so that is easy. I'm going to use 3 grams of Savinski Golding for the dry hop. But to start with the boil, we have in the Brew Your Own British Real Ale a ratio of 2:1 between Challenger and Fuggle. And in the Real Ale Almanac, they are, I think, also specifying, oh no, they're even more arbitrary. They're just saying that it is Fuggle and other varieties of whole hops. Great. So I do have Fuggles and East Kent Goldings as whole hops. I only have the Styrian Goldings as pellets, but that will have to make do. So what I calculated here is that they are using 12 grams of the 2:1 ratio of Challenger and Fuggles with an average alpha acidity of 6.7%, and my average alpha acidity, alpha acid content, if I use the same ratio, would be 5.1%, so I have to scale up to 12 grams in total, which is then 3 grams of Fuggles, 6 grams of Challenger, and there I am done with the boiling. Yeah, both beers 90 minutes of boiling time, that's just the standard that they always use in the book. I'm not going to change that either this time. And then an aroma hopping of, what is it, 3 grams I think? Yeah, 3 grams of East Kent Goldings for the last 10 minutes. I'm not going to change the value even though the alpha acids of my East Kent Goldings are lower, because I noticed that it is still very strong in flavor. So if I do adjust, it gets a bit overpowering. So 3 grams East Kent Golding for the last 10 minutes, and then, as I said, the dry hop 3 grams, probably towards the end of the fermentation. So when the yeast starts to drop out of suspension and you get lessening of the bubbling, I usually just put in the hops just as is. The yeast. So Theakston Old Peculiar, as I have read in the internet, in the whites and white spaces there, one of the best yeasts to use is the White Labs 37 Yorkshire Square Ale. That is really difficult to get hold of because it is a seasonal yeast and I cannot find it anywhere in Germany. And interestingly, the best substitute is not the West Yorkshire Ale from Wyeast. The best substitute, as people were told in numerous places, is a Belgian yeast. The White Labs 550 Belgian Ale, and that's the one that I have here. I have it in the fridge at the moment. I'm going to take it out a bit later so that it doesn't get too warm. I'm not going to make a starter because I have 100 billion yeast cells and I need about 50, so I might even just use half of it and store the rest for future use. And yeah, I'm just going to pitch it right when the preparation's finished and everything's at temperature. I don't think a starter will be necessary for the fresh yeast from the fridge, as long as the temperatures are the same, obviously. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how this works out, but I'm quite confident because I did do a lot of research here. And if you want to recreate either of them, then I'm pretty sure you will have lots of fun just using my recipe, but you're welcome to tune the water maybe. I don't know what Yorkshire water is like, but I can imagine, because they used to brew in the slate Yorkshire squares, that if you want to be historical, you could do it more mineral-like. Not sure what mineral is in slate though. And maybe you can use just a modern optimized recipe for especially malty beers or especially hoppy beers, you know, for the Old Peculiar or the Landlord. Now, the types of beer I'm brewing today, the Landlord is supposed to be a bitter or pale ale. These words are interchangeable in the historic sense. So it's a classic low alcohol bitter or best bitter, and it's a bit more hop forward. And the Old Peculiar is, I think nowadays called an old ale, but that is a modern name that didn't exist 100 years ago. This type of beer used to be called Burton ales because they are aged, very malty, very dark, and also quite hoppy to assure that the aging works. So that is something that used to be called Burton ale. I'm going to talk to you in a minute about how the things went down. I hope everything's successful, but you will find out soon. And see you in a minute. Okay, it's a bit later now, and it's 9 hours and 15 minutes that it took me to brew these two beers. You have the Timothy Taylor Landlord here. This wort looks darker than it will be in the end, because it brightens during the pH change during fermentation. This one does not quite look as dark as it should be. It should be completely black for 100 EBC. When stirring in the molasses, I actually overdid it a bit and I got 75 grams in the end. So it is more than I intended. But I did calculate the EBC because I just now found that molasses usually has about 400 EBC and I couldn't find the info earlier, I don't know why. So this is about 70 in total, which is less than Old Peculiar is supposed to be. Molasses has an interesting taste. It is a bit salty, licorice, yeah, really interesting. I think it's the leftover minerals and everything from refining sugars. So I understand now why it's supposed to be a health food and everything. But yeah, maybe it's useful for the yeast, who knows. So this one has 10.8 degree Brix, which is pretty much spot on. This one has 14.2% or degree Brix. This is a bit less because I lost some wort, and the reason for that is that while for this one the mash worked really well, everything went through smoothly and yeah, had no issues at all. The only difficult thing with this one was when hop boiling. There was really a lot of hop in there, and you could really see how just hops were everywhere and were whole hops. So there was a lot of liquid in those hops. I thought I would lose a bit of wort, but in the end it turned out to be not much. Maybe I would be at a higher filling level without the whole hops, but I think I need a lot of headroom for the special yeast. And when it came to this one, I got a set mash, and it barely anything flew through my mash kettle, so I had to shake it a bit and loosen it up, and then it worked a bit slightly. And the problem with that is it tends to stop early. Then once the flow stops, you cannot do anything anymore if it's just a little bit of residue. So I might have lost 400 milliliters, 500 milliliters, which is too much for my liking, but it can happen. I don't know why the one was more of an issue than the other. I mean, this one had less malt in it, of course, but also the main malt was from different suppliers, so maybe this one was ground more coarsely or more finer, I don't know. One of the two. Yeah, if I would know, I could adjust in the future or just crush my own malt, but I have no idea what's the difference there. So the next thing I would do is put in the yeast. I have a sanitized spoon. I'm just gently removing this one here. Put it at the clean spot where the clean spoon was before. Take my sanitized funnel, and then I shouldn't speak because I might exhale stuff. Okay. Interestingly, there is an intensely bready smell from this yeast now, which I have never smelled before from a starter. So normally I know that my bottom fermenting yeast can smell really like bread yeast. But this one, I can't remember that it ever did this before. But then I never had a starter where it really boosted for a whole day. I usually just get it woken up and then immediately pitch it. And yeah, the next one would be this one. I should not swap these, and I should pour in a tad of water. I'll do that here. Okay, so just to flush in the yeast, flush down the yeast. And now the next one is this one. They say I should use sanitized scissors. Never sanitized scissors before. So I should sanitize the back though. These are actually methylated spirits from the UK. But they're so old that they lost all their purple color that they once used to have. Okay, so I'm obviously going to clean this one very thoroughly. And while I'm at it, why not clean the scissors as well? Alrighty. As I said before, I need half of the whole content here, so I am going to put half of it in the vessel here. Yeah, more than half, but that should be fine. Yeah, so I'm going to be quite curious as to how the molasses taste in this one. Because it's an old ale, it's supposed to age for some time at least. I might have to wait for 7-8 weeks. I'm not sure how I will do the tasting of this. So I might actually just do this one after 4 weeks and this one later, or both of them after 4 weeks and this one revisiting again 4 weeks. So after 8 weeks in total. Yeah, we will see how this turns out. If you want to recreate this, you might want to consider not using molasses, but instead the brewing sugar number 3, I think. But that one only has 130 EBC, so it's not really dark. But maybe brewing sugar number 4, which is really dark, 500, 600 EBC would be the one. I don't know. My guess is with molasses, and I will see if I like the beer, and then maybe I will use molasses again in the future. We'll see. I will keep the starter for the Timothy Taylor yeast for a bit, just to see if there's some more yeast that I can harvest. And that would be it. I hope you will be joining again for the next video, which is the tasting. And then I would say, have a good day and take care.